I am tightening the strings of a half-finished violin when the sound reaches me. A faint click-clack like metal teeth biting shut. The workshop smells of resin and old wood, but suddenly all I can hear is that alien noise from the living room. The vault. My vault. I step out, fingers still sticky with varnish. Sophia is already there, slim frame leaning over the safe as if she owns the air around it. In her hand, a folder. In her eyes, no hesitation. She doesn't even greet me. She simply lays the paper flat on the table, the edges perfectly aligned like a lawyer preparing evidence. Sign this, Margaret, quickly. The house is on the market, $300,000. If you delay, we'll lose it. My heart stutters. A string snapped mid-note. The fluorescent light paints her skin pale, almost icy. I can hear the scrape of her nails against the page as she pushes it toward me. Then it happens. Daniel bends down to retie a shoe. The lace slips loose, his fingers fumble, and the box he steadies on his knees slides open. Out tumbles another document. My name, my signature, but not written by me. The ink still wet, curling in loops too obedient, too perfect. The world tilts. The smell of cedar from the violins mixes with the metallic tang of betrayal. My chest tightens, my palms sweat. I want to ask, how long have they planned this? How long have they rehearsed this play? Sophia's voice slices through. Mother, don't make this difficult. It's just paperwork. Everyone knows parents help their children. Isn't that what family is? Her words echo, hollow, against the ribs of my chest. I look at Daniel, my son, my only son. He doesn't meet my eyes. He keeps tugging at the loosened lace, knotting and unknotting, as though the shoelace is more important than my trust. In that moment, everything slows. The hum of the ceiling fan, the pulse in my ears, the scratch of paper against wood, and I realize a single loose shoelace has exposed not just a forgery, but the trap carefully woven beneath the melody of our family. The violin bow rests on my lap, its ebony wood smooth beneath my thumb. I trace the curve of it like one traces the edge of an old scar. Every groove holds memory, and tonight it opens a door I've tried to keep shut. I see myself, 25 years younger, standing in Cremona, Italy, the birthplace of Stradivari. My hands trembled as I first held a block of maple, raw and stubborn, waiting to be carved into a body that might one day sing. The air in the workshop was thick with turpentine and ambition. My master used to say, "Wood has a soul. If you carve carelessly, you wound it forever." I carved carefully. Night after night, while others slept, I bent over the bench, shaping the arch of the violin's belly, polishing its ribs until the candle burned to nothing but wax tears. The first violin I completed, after months of blisters and splinters, sold for $120,000 at an auction in Milan. My chest swelled with pride, not at the money, but at the thought that something born of my hands, my sleeplessness, would now carry music into halls I would never step inside. That money, every dollar, vanished into needs I didn't hesitate to meet. Daniel's university tuition in the States, $80,000, spread over 4 relentless years. Each transfer receipt still lingers in a folder I keep hidden, numbers etched like a secret ledger of my sacrifices. The $70,000 hospital bill when my husband's father collapsed one winter, I paid it without question because family meant obligation. Another $50,000 went to repair the roof that caved after a storm. I remember the rain dripping through the ceiling onto my workbench, warping the unfinished wood. I couldn't allow my violins to drown. I kept no glory for myself, not a holiday, not even a proper winter coat, just the steady beat of chisels against wood, bow against string, and through it all, Daniel was my refrain. He was 12 when he first peeked into my workshop, his hair falling into his eyes. I was gluing the neck of a violin, and he whispered as if in church, "Mom, one day I'll play a song that makes you happy." His voice was shy but sure, and I believed him. I clung to those words through endless nights. Now, remembering, my throat tightens. Those words return, but not as a promise. They echo like a demand. There were hints, even then shadows foreshadowing the storm. The day I handed him a check for tuition, he barely looked at me. He only said, "Is this enough?" Because the dorms are expensive. His eyes flicked not to me, but to the paper in my hand. I laughed it off, telling myself he was nervous, too young to know gratitude. Another time, when I canceled a commission so I could pay for his textbooks, he frowned. "Why would you turn down a client?" "That's careless, Mom. Careless." The word stung. I carried it back into my workshop that night and carved it into the wood, though no one else would ever see it. Was I naive? Did I mistake dependence for love? Every sacrifice I made, I believed would bind us tighter. Yet the rope I thought was woven from devotion was, perhaps, only a leash he learned to pull. I still remember December of his second year in college. The electricity bill arrived late, the paper soaked from rain, numbers bleeding into the page. 85, just enough to make my hands tremble. I slipped the bill into a plastic sleeve and tucked it into my apron pocket, then stayed up all night finishing the varnish on a violin, praying the buyer wouldn't haggle. That sale kept the lights on. Daniel never knew. I told him, "Everything is fine here. Focus on your exams." But everything was not fine. Even my tools became silent witnesses. The maple shavings that curled onto the floor like fallen petals. The bowstrings stretched thin, fraying faster than I could replace them. Each object bore testimony to the truth I refused to say aloud. I was giving everything and receiving little more than expectation. Sometimes I wonder if I mistook exhaustion for love. If I believed the sheer weight of my sacrifices would somehow guarantee me a place in his heart. Maybe I was too blind, I whisper now, staring at the bow in my lap. Maybe I thought love was a melody you could buy with enough silence, enough hours, enough dollars. I sigh. The bow feels heavier tonight. Once it represented music, hope, the promise of joy. Now it feels like the ledger of my mistakes, every note tied to a figure: 20,000, 80,000, 70,000, 50,000. A symphony of sacrifice. And the refrain that returns again and again is his boyish voice. "Mom, one day I'll play a song that makes you happy." But here I am, decades later, hearing only the cold echo of his wife demanding my signature. The attic room where I once lived was barely large enough for a bed and a table, but it held the sound of my dreams. The roof leaked when it rained, and in winter the wind slid through the cracks, slicing my fingers numb as I worked. Still, it was where my life as a luthier truly began. I remember nights when the only light came from a stub of candle balanced on a chipped saucer. I would sit cross-legged on the floor, my violin across my lap, patching a broken string with hands raw from cold. The resin clung to my skin, sticky and fragrant like honey turned bitter. Daniel, no more than 5 years old, often curled beside me. His pajamas smelled faintly of laundry hung too long in the damp air. He would rest his cheek on my thigh while I tightened the pegs, eyes wide in the flickering glow. One night, as the bow scraped across the strings, the violin produced a sound low and trembling, a sound I could not control. Daniel lifted his head and whispered, "Mom, why is the violin crying?" I paused, the question piercing deeper than he knew. My lips curved into a smile, but my heart cracked. "Because, my love, it keeps my tears safe inside," I told him. He reached out, small fingers brushing the bow. "Then I'll help it smile one day," he promised. His voice was so earnest that, for a moment, the cold didn't matter, the hunger didn't matter. In his words, I heard a symphony of hope. I kept working, selling what repairs I could, restoring old violins for a fraction of what they were worth. Each dollar fed him, clothed him, paid the rent for our drafty attic. My own meals were crusts of bread and thin soup, but I told myself the hunger was worth it. Every time Daniel laughed, it was as though I had eaten a feast. The bow became more than a tool. Its black wood, polished by years of use, carried fingerprints of my struggles, my resilience. Sometimes I would hold it against my chest, feeling the weight of it as if it were both shield and burden. There was one winter when Daniel grew sick with fever. The doctor asked for payment I didn't have. I remember pawning a violin I had repaired for weeks, accepting only half its value just to buy medicine. That night, as Daniel slept, his breath shallow but steady, I sat on the floor and wept into the bow, my tears dampening the horsehair. It seemed to hum with me, a silent witness to both despair and devotion. Those years were painted in shades of sacrifice, yet they also glowed with small mercies. Daniel's arms around my neck, his giggles when I tickled him with the bow's tip, the way he clapped when I played even the simplest tune. He was my audience, my reason, my unfinished symphony. And now, remembering, I feel the sting of irony. The violin that once held our shared laughter and tears is the same object lying silent on my bench tonight, watching as he turns away from me. I press my palm against the bow resting nearby, the old grooves familiar under my skin. Once it was my anchor in poverty, now it is the witness to betrayal. It wasn't the shouting that broke me. It wasn't even Sophia's sharp words, or the way Daniel avoided my eyes. It was smaller than that, a teacup. That evening, I lifted it from the sink, porcelain cracked, handle chipped. It had been Daniel's favorite cup when he was a boy, painted with faded blue stars. I had carried it with me through every move, every new country, every sacrifice. Now, when I touched it, I realized he wouldn't care if it shattered. He wouldn't even notice if it vanished. My chest hollowed. The cup trembled in my hands as though echoing my heart. That was the moment I knew. If I kept bending, I would break. The questions came like hammer blows inside my skull. Am I still a mother? Or have I become a wallet with hands? Do they see my love? Or only my bank account? How many more pieces of myself am I willing to sell before nothing is left? If I die tomorrow, will they remember my voice or just the checks I signed? Each question carved itself into me like the chisel on spruce wood. Each answer was silence. I walked to the safe. The keypad blinked, waiting for me. My fingers hovered, damp with sweat. Behind that door lay the transfer documents, the tidy arrangement of my life's work ready to vanish into their hands. The numbers swam before me as I typed the code. Beep, beep, the lock clicked, heavy and final. I pulled out the folder, the bank forms, the authorization slips. Papers rustled like dry leaves, fragile yet capable of swallowing me whole. I held them in both hands, then ripped them down the middle. The sound was sharp, violent, like a string snapping under too much tension. My breath hitched, but with every tear, my spine straightened. I shredded the transfer forms until confetti littered the floor, white snow on the dark wood. My hand shook, not from fear this time, but from release. I pressed the safe shut and spun the dial. The clunk of the lock sliding home reverberated in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't opening myself to be emptied. I was closing the door, but the fear came rushing in after. What if they never forgive me? What if Daniel turns his back forever? What if I end my days alone, surrounded not by family but by violins that cannot speak? The price of resistance might be isolation. The cost of obedience was annihilation. I stood between those choices, trembling. Either way, I would lose something precious. But only one path would allow me to keep myself. And I realized I would rather be alone with my music than erased inside their silence. I returned to the teacup still waiting by the sink. This time, I set it gently back on the shelf, cracked but unbroken. My reflection wavered in the glaze, tired but resolute. For years, I had been the background music to their lives, soft, constant, unnoticed. Tonight, I stopped playing. I wiped my palms on my apron, straightened my shoulders, and whispered aloud, as if declaring to the walls, "From this day on, the music I play will no longer be written for them. The days after my decision stretched long and brittle, like strings pulled too tight. Dinner became a battlefield of silence. The clink of fork against plate echoed too loud, every scrape a reminder of words unsaid. Daniel ate quickly, eyes fixed on his food, as though conversation was more dangerous than fire. Sophia barely touched her meal, her lips pressed thin, her phone never far from reach. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow even as my throat closed. The taste of roasted chicken turned to ash. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing against my chest. At night, I could hear footsteps outside my workshop, pausing, then retreating. I never opened the door. I simply held the bow in my hands, its wood cool against my palm, as if it could steady me. Then came the messages. The first one from Daniel arrived just after midnight. "Mom, if you love me, don't make this harder for Sophia, please." I stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred. Love. Was it a weapon now? A measuring stick they could hold against my throat? I didn't reply. My thumbs hovered above the keyboard, but no words felt true enough, safe enough. Silence became my only answer. A second message followed 2 days later. "Sophia says you don't care about us. Is that what you want me to believe?" My heart tightened. I wanted to shout, "No, Daniel, it's not true. I cared so much I burned myself to ashes for you." But I typed nothing. I let the phone go dark in my hands, my reflection staring back like a stranger. The tension seeped into everything. When I passed Sophia in the hallway, she shifted just enough that my shoulder brushed the wall. A subtle move, but sharp as a blade. When Daniel came home late, he no longer kissed my cheek. He muttered a quick, "Good night," the word clipped, mechanical. Even the dog-sweet Bella kept her distance, sensing the storm in human hearts. The house was filled with noise, yet felt utterly quiet. The television murmured in the living room, but laughter never came. The refrigerator hummed, steady and indifferent. Even the violins in my workshop seemed mute, their strings refusing to sing under my trembling bow. One evening, while clearing the table, I noticed Sophia's gaze on me, cool, assessing. She didn't speak, but her look said everything. "You are the obstacle. You will move, one way or another." I carried the dishes to the sink, my knees weak. The water ran too hot, scalding my hands, but I welcomed the sting. At least pain reminded me I was still alive. The calm was unbearable. Not peace, no, peace is gentle. This was the hush of an orchestra just before the conductor raises his hand. The audience leaning forward, breath held, waiting for the first explosive chord. And I, caught in that hush, knew it would not last. The final message came the following morning. "If you still see me as your son, you'll reconsider. Don't force us to take other steps." My blood ran cold. Other steps. The words dripped with warning, with promise. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone until my knuckles ached. In the distance, I thought I heard the faint vibration of strings, the echo of a bow gliding across them. Not music, but dissonance, a prelude to chaos. The living room used to be my refuge, the place where music once lingered after Daniel practiced his scales. Now it felt poisoned. The curtains hung stiff, blocking the light, and the air carried the faint bitterness of burnt coffee. On the table lay a neat stack of folders. Legal blue covers, corners sharp enough to cut. A single pen rested across the top like a waiting dagger. I sat in my chair, the wood creaking under me. My hands rested in my lap, one thumb tracing the groove of my bow I had brought unconsciously from the workshop. Its presence steadied me. The door opened. Daniel stepped in first, his shoulders tense, jaw tight. Behind him came Sophia, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with measured precision. And then, the third figure, a man in a gray suit, briefcase polished, glasses glinting. "Oh, their lawyer." Sophia's smile was small, practiced. She lowered herself onto the sofa opposite me, crossing her legs. Daniel stood behind her, arms folded. The lawyer placed the briefcase on the table, unclasped it with a metallic snap, and slid a folder forward. "Mother," Sophia began, voice smooth as silk. We're here to settle things sensibly. You have resources just sitting there, violins, instruments, accounts. It would be wiser to invest in the future, don't you think? I kept my gaze steady. Wiser for whom? She tilted her head, feigning patience. For Daniel, for me, for the children we'll raise. Isn't that why you work so hard? To give us a chance. My fingers tightened around the bow. I work so hard to give my son a life, not to fund your ambitions. Daniel shifted, clearing his throat. Mom, don't start. Sophia's right. You can't take any of it with you. Why not make things easier? Easier, I repeated softly. For you. The lawyer slid the papers closer. It's a simple transfer of authority, he said, tapping the signature line. No one is taking advantage. It's standard procedure. I leaned forward, the wood of the chair pressing into my spine. If it's so simple, why forge my signature first? Silence. Daniel's eyes darted to the floor. Sophia's smile faltered but quickly returned. That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding written in my hand, I said coldly. The beats of conversation fell sharp, one after the other. Sophia, you're clinging to old wood and strings. Sell them. Let young people live. Me, a violin can be sold. My dignity cannot. Daniel, we're only asking for what's fair. You don't need all of it. Me fair. I gave you everything already. You want the rest of me too? Sophia, don't dramatize, Margaret. Families share. Families sacrifice. Me, I have sacrificed. The question is, when will you stop taking? Then came the blow, the break in the game. Sophia leaned forward, her voice dropping. If you won't sign willingly, we'll take this to court. The law will side with us. You're old, vulnerable, confused. Judges see it every day. The words slice deeper than any insult. Old, vulnerable, confused. They wanted to paint me as a relic, a cracked violin unfit to play. Daniel didn't stop her. He only rubbed the bridge of his nose, silent, complicit. I felt my chest rise, breath heavy, but my voice emerged steady, sharper than I imagined possible. I pushed the folder back across the table, the pen clattering against the wood. I looked at them both, my son and the woman he chose, and said, a violin can be stripped, its strings replaced, its body sold to the highest bidder. But self-respect, once gone, cannot be restored. And I will not sell mine. Sophia's eyes narrowed, venom replacing the mask of charm. Daniel muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch. I rose slowly, the bow still in my hand. My knees trembled, but my back was straight. I am no longer the background music for your grand performance, I declared. I will not be the accompaniment to your greed. From now on, I compose for myself. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air held still. Then Sophia snapped the folder shut, the sound like a slammed door. She stood, yanking her bag from the sofa. You'll regret this, she hissed. Daniel lingered a second longer, his face pale, torn between anger and something I couldn't name. But he followed her out, the door closing harder than it needed to. The house fell quiet again. My hand shook violently, the bow rattling against my palm. I lowered myself back into the chair, heart pounding, ears ringing. Yet somewhere beneath the trembling, a spark burned. Small, fragile, but alive. I looked at the shredded silence of the living room, the empty table where their papers had been, and I knew this was only an intermission. The real battle hadn't yet begun. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, thin and official, the kind of paper that smells like a courthouse. I knew before I opened it. My hands still shook anyway. The seal tore with a dry sigh. The summons slid into my palm like a blade. Superior Court. Plaintiffs. Daniel Carter and Sophia Reed. Relief sought, transfer of financial authority and injunctive control of assets. The words spidered across my vision. For a long breath, I only heard the refrigerator hum and the second hand of the kitchen clock stumble over a nick it always catches. Outside, a neighbor's screen door banged and low conversations drifted. Not my name, not exactly, but the shape of it. The pity-shaped murmur that always finds the person who's suddenly the story. I sat at the table and reread the letter until the black ink went gray. I couldn't feel my fingers. I pressed the summons flat with my palm, the paper warm from my skin, and tried not to cry. The complaints were neat, almost polite in their cruelty. Margaret Carter exhibits cognitive decline, repeated instances of financial irresponsibility, a history of promising substantial gifts to her son and daughter-in-law, then reneging. There were statements, attached quotes that didn't belong to me, dates I knew were wrong. One page included a scan of an authorization I had never signed, my name spelled by a hand too smooth, too eager. Sophia's first blow hadn't been the fake signature. This was not only a knife, but a performance around it, the law as stage, me as prop. I took the bus to the copy shop on Maple Street and made 3 sets of everything: the summons, the complaint, the exhibits. The copy machine thumped and breathed like an animal. Each warm sheet slid into the tray and piled the same lie again and again. I tucked the stacks into my tote, then walked home with the steady carefulness of someone carrying a bowl filled to the lip. On the corner, Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery looked up from sweeping sugar off the sidewalk. "Everything okay, Margaret?" she asked, soft. I lied and said yes. She hesitated, then slipped a paper bag into my hands, 2-day-old rolls. "Take these," she said, "for later." The kindness nearly undid me. That night, I opened the folders Sophia had once slammed onto my living room table and laid them beside my own record books. I pulled out the ledger I kept for commissions dates in my tilt of handwriting, amounts and notes in the margins. Client wants warmer varnish tone, bridge adjusted 2M. I found the bank statements, $45,000 wired to Northridge University on September 3rd, 2017. The memo line, fall tuition Daniel C. I found the hospital receipt, $69,874.12 paid January 14, 29. My signature there, real. My stroke imperfect where my hand cramped. I printed screenshots of messages too. "Mom, dorm fee is due Friday, Oct 12, 2018. Can you send?" And my reply, sent. Focus on midterms. I lined it all in a row across the table like instruments before a rehearsal, each tuned to a pitch I could trust. Paper can be a weapon. It can also be a shield. The next morning, a rumor beat me to the market. Faces turned, then didn't. Conversations thinned as I passed. Near the tomatoes, I heard it plain. "Poor Daniel," someone said. "His mother's gotten strange, all alone with those old violins." The words stuck to my coat like burrs. I kept walking, back straight, spine aching. By Monday, I had a lawyer. Her name was Leila Tran, 32, hair in a sharp bob, voice even sharper. She met me in a small office above a florist's shop, the room smelling of dirt and green things. "I do elder law and family cases," she said, sliding a legal pad between us. "I also grew up with a mother who made and repaired cellos. So," she lifted a brow, "I know a little about dedication being mistaken for docility." I felt something inside me loosen. "I don't want a war," I said. "I want the truth to stand up without wobbling." "That's a good line," Leila said, unsmiling but kind. "Let's give it a spine." We started with the dates, January 10th, 2020. I wrote "no" on a sticky note they'd pushed across a cafe table, May 6, 2022. Security camera at Valeri's Jewelry captured me entering alone at 10:12 a.m., leaving at 10:38 a.m. with a violin case. August 2, 2023. I texted Daniel, "I cannot co-sign a mortgage," at 9:24 p.m., and he replied, "We'll find another way." Leila circled things in blue. Paper trail. Tone. Consistency, she murmured. "They're painting you as impulsive and confused. We'll show steady and precise." "What about witnesses?" I asked. Leila tapped her pen against her lip. "Who's known you longer than Sophia?" Who's seen you focused, rational? Music people? The name rose in my mouth before I could stop it. Anya Petrov, I said. Principal second violin, Riverlight Symphony. We worked together on a recalibration of her 18th century instrument last winter. Leela wrote it down. Call her, she said. If she's willing, have her put something in writing first. Character, memory, the way you handle detail. Then we'll subpoena if needed. I called Anya from the bench in my workshop, the phone propped between my shoulder and ear. She answered on the second ring, voice warm with Slavic smoke. Margaret, how is my stubborn G string? I laughed, relief like water. Still temperamental, I said. Then I told her everything, or enough to make the shape of it. When I finished, the silence on the line felt like the moment before a conductor's downbeat. Tell me when and where, she said finally. I will be there. I have seen your hands. They are steady when the world is not. When I hung up, I laid my bow across my knee and breathed. The evidence from their side multiplied. Affidavits, typed statements, even a neighbor, Mr. C. Collins from 3B, who swore under oath he'd heard me promise the full $300,000 before Christmas. I glanced at the date on his statement, June 5, 2024. On June 5, 2024, my flight itinerary placed me in Milan, accepting a commission for a repair at 9, Jarroa. There was a photo of me in the Piazza del Duomo, sunlight carving my face into new lines. In the top right corner of the picture-blessed accident, the cathedral clock read 09:47. Leela smiled when she saw it. Sometimes the world testifies, she said. Sophia also produced a text exchange, screenshot cropped too neatly, where I supposedly wrote, "We'll help with the house." The timestamp bar was suspiciously missing. Leela filed a request for metadata. The opposing counsel bristled. The judge granted it. When the records came, they showed the original thread, me writing, "I can help by looking at loan options. I cannot give you $300,000. The cropping had done the rest. Leela labeled the exhibit Def 14 and underlined "cannot" 3 times in red. Clever, I thought, the kind of clever that corrodes. There were days the case pressed me flat and thin. I woke with my heart sprinting, lay still and counted to 50, then 100. I ate standing up. I forgot to drink water. The violins gathered dust. Twice I walked into the workshop, tucked my chin, lifted the bow, and lowered it again, unable to make a single sound. Then something ordinary would rescue me. On October 3rd, Bella the dog, who'd been keeping to the far corners of rooms, brought me her leash, tail low, eyes hopeful. We walked along the river path and watched a boy on a bridge toss crumbs to gulls. The air was cold enough to sting. The sun slid between clouds and turned the water into fabric. I breathed like someone unclenching. That night, I slept for 5 hours straight. On October 7, Mrs. Alvarez put a cinnamon roll on my counter and refused my money. "Pay me with a concert," she said, winking. "One day, when this is over." I promised I would. I meant it. Crisis. Then kindness. Tightening, loosening. The body's own sonata. Our first pretrial conference laid the shape of battle. The opposing lawyer, Mr. Gray suit with a perfect part, spoke as if dictating a textbook. "It's tragic," he said, palms uplifted. "Mrs. Carter has given so much. She is tired. She needs protection from her own poor decisions." Leela didn't raise her voice. "Protection isn't a cudgel," she answered, "and generosity is not incapacity." She slid the Def 114 printout across the table. "This is the full text of the message your client submitted. The version you filed omits the sentence where my client clearly says she cannot give $300,000. We will be requesting sanctions if this pattern continues." Mr. Gray's smile withered by a millimeter. When we left the room, my knees trembled. Leela put a hand on my shoulder for 2 seconds, the exact length of a mercy. "You're doing well," she said. "Keep breathing." The symphony called a rehearsal for October 12. I'd borrowed a chair at the back and watched Anya bow through a Shostakovich quartet, her face a study in concentration. After, we sat on the edge of the stage, legs dangling like schoolgirls. The hall's empty seats grew their own hush around us. You remember the winter storm? Anya said, smiling. I came at midnight with my violin because the A string had turned traitor. You made tea in that dented kettle and fixed it while the wind tried to take the roof. I remember, I said. You played me 2 measures of Bartok, and the ceiling stopped creaking. You work like a surgeon, she said. The judge should see your hands. They do not shake when it matters. She squeezed my fingers. And I will say this under oath. Later, in my kitchen, I wrote her statement as she spoke, and we refined it into a paragraph with bones. Professional reliability, fine motor control, attention to detail under stress. The words looked clinical. The feeling behind them was anything but. Tension climbed. Then it paused. Then it climbed again. A blogger with more followers than facts posted, local son sues mom over promised gift. My name didn't appear, but the comments guessed correctly. I stopped opening the app. I stopped answering numbers I didn't know. I stopped looking too long at my reflection. On October 19, I found a small package on my stoop. No note. Inside, a lump of maple, perfect curl, old as breath. I knew who had sent it, Mr. Leone, the retired conductor who lived 2 streets over. I walked it to his door. He shrugged and said, "For your next one," then shut the door before I could cry into his sweater. In the workshop that night, I traced the grain with my thumb and whispered, "Next one," like a password to a life that still wanted me. The week before trial, Leela sat me down with a yellow pad. "Worst case scenario," she said. "We name them so they can't ambush you." I swallowed. "Daniel not speaking to me again." She wrote it in clean block letters. "Daniel, gun, another, losing the case," she wrote. LOS, another, being called crazy, being believed. She wrote slower, dismissed-y. Then she set the pen down. And on the other side, I hesitated, keeping myself. She wrote it small but firm. Self. "Good," she said. We pushed toward that. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like dust and coffee. My shoes clicked on the tile, crisp and out of place. Anya was already there in a dark dress, hair braided down her back. She hugged me once, then took a seat behind the bar. Leela stood beside me, flipping through a binder, calm as a metronome. Across the aisle, Sophia whispered to Mr. Gray, her mouth curved like a cut. Daniel stared at the floor. When the clerk called our case, I felt that strange hush again. The orchestra's breath held before the first strike of the bow. The judge entered, robes swinging. We stood. We sat. "Mr. Gray began. He spoke in clean lines. I was inconsistent. I made large gifts and withheld larger ones. I was prone to emotional outbursts, forgetful, easily manipulated by strangers." He held up a sheet I recognized only by its scars. It had been torn down the middle and taped back together, the proof of my impulsivity. Leela didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she began not with me, but with the timeline. September 3rd, 2017, 45,000 tuition. January 14, 2019, 6019,874. 12 hospital bill. August 2, 2023. I cannot co-sign a mortgage. She rested her palm on DEF 14. Context, she said, not rumor. Then she called Anya. Anya spoke like she plays, precise, inevitably convincing. She described the winter storm, the tea, the recalibration in low light. She was calm, Anya said, eyes on the judge. Her hands never shook. Not when the roof groaned. Not when the glue set. The work required control at 1/10 of a millimeter. If her mind were clouded, my instrument would tell on her. A small smile. It sings. Leela handed her the cropped screenshot and the full thread. "Which version sings true?" she asked. "The full one," Anya said without missing a beat. A ripple. Even the court reporter looked up. Mr. Gray tried to rehabilitate his witnesses. He called Mr. Collins of 3B. Under gentle questions, the neighbor repeated his claim he'd heard me promise the full $300,000 before Christmas. Leela's cross took less than 2 minutes. Mr. Collins, on June 5, 2024, where were you at 10:15 a.m.? Here, in the building, I guess. She slid the printed photograph onto the ledge. The cathedral clock glowed in its corner. How then did you overhear a conversation in my client's kitchen while she stood in Milan? The courtroom exhaled. Mr. Collins' mouth opened, closed, found no pitch he could carry. The judge's eyebrow rose. I sat very still. A string inside me loosened one exact turn. We weren't finished, far from it. But for the first time since the envelope, I sensed the music shifting, the melody of their certainty bending toward dissonance. When we stepped into the hallway at recess, the sunlight through the high windows cut the dust into confetti. Anya squeezed my shoulder. Leela said, "Good," and in her mouth the word meant both enough and more to do. I leaned against the cool wall tile and closed my eyes. My hands were cold, my heart steadied. Can truth hold? I wondered. Can it stay tuned when so many hands want it to warp? I pictured the maple block on my bench, the way the right curve invites resonance and the wrong one chokes it. I pictured my son's face, turned away. I pictured my own, older than I remember, but real. We filed back in when the bailiff called. I lifted my chin. Because in the courtroom, lies ring like sour notes. Everyone hears them. And the question that hummed at the back of my throat as I took my seat was simple and enormous. When the final chord falls, who will I be brave enough to remain? The folder was heavier than it should have been. I pulled it from the stack of documents delivered by the court clerk, expecting only duplicates of what I had already seen. But as I flipped through, a page slid loose and fell to the floor. I bent to pick it up and froze. My name stared back at me in bold ink, scrawled across the bottom of a contract I had never signed. The letters curled too neatly, loops too obedient. My real signature bore scars, hesitations where my hand cramped, a small tilt in the G from years of fatigue. This one was smooth, practiced, as if written by someone tracing from memory. The paper was cold against my fingertips. The ink smelled faintly chemical, still new. My heart stuttered once, then began pounding in my ears. They did it. They forged me. They turned me into a ghost who agrees to her own undoing. I laid the sheet flat on the table, breath shallow, the edges blurred. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second slamming down like a gavel. I whispered aloud, "So this is how far they'll go." I tried to sit still, but anger propelled me up. I paced the room, the floor creaking under my feet. My mind replayed every moment. Sophia's smirk, Daniel's silence, the lawyer's calm voice describing me as confused. It all fit now. The forgery was not an accident. It was the weapon they had always meant to use. Am I a fool? I asked the empty room. Did I raise my own executioner? Did I sharpen the knife by feeding him all those years? The bow lay on my workbench, black wood gleaming in the lamplight. I picked it up, pressing it to my chest. My hands trembled, but the bow was steady, reminding me of every concert. Every night I held music together while chaos tried to intrude. They can fake my name, I thought, but they cannot fake the truth that lives in my hands. I called Leela. My voice broke as I told her. She didn't flinch. "Bring it tomorrow," she said. "Don't touch the ink again. We'll run it through analysis. The smoother the line, the clearer the lie." Her steadiness seeped into me. By the time I hung up, my breath had slowed. My anger sharpened into resolve. I slipped the page into a plastic sleeve, sealing it like evidence of a crime. That night, I sat in the dark, violin on my lap. I didn't play. I simply held it, feeling the grain under my palm. I remembered Daniel as a boy asking why the violin cried. Now I knew. It wept because truth, once warped, could never sound the same. But it could still resonate. Closing line. A signature can be forged, but a genuine melody cannot. The days leading up to trial felt like sharpening a blade. Leela arrived with boxes, binders labeled by color, tabs sticking out like feathers. She spread them across my dining table until the wood disappeared. Bank statements, receipts, text messages printed and highlighted, every number, every date, a note in the symphony of my defense. Paper is our armor, she said. Truth is slow, but it cuts. I gathered my own files. Old commission logs, sketches of violins, letters from clients. Each sheet carried proof that I was meticulous, consistent, sane. Every canceled check bore my real hand, imperfect but alive. Friends appeared in small bursts, carrying encouragement like lanterns. Mrs. Alvarez slipped cinnamon rolls onto the table and whispered, "You stood for them your whole life. Now stand for you." Anya came after rehearsal, her violin case slung over her shoulder. She placed both hands on mine. "The music you crafted has filled halls," she said. "Don't let your voice be drowned now." I nodded, swallowing hard. Their words became threads I wove into courage. At night I rehearsed. I stood before the mirror, folder in hand, and spoke my answers aloud. The first time, my voice quavered, trailing into apology. I recorded myself and played it back, thin, uncertain, almost pleading. I tried again. I adjusted my stance, squared my shoulders, looked straight into my own eyes. "Mrs. Carter, did you ever agree to give your son and daughter-in-law $300,000? "No," I answered firmly. "I told them I could not. I provided for their needs, but I never promised such a gift." The words sounded clearer the second time, stronger the third. By the 10th, my voice carried weight, not desperation. One evening, I lit a single candle in the workshop. I took my bow in both hands and lifted it like a sword. The horsehair gleamed pale in the flame. "This is how I've fought my whole life," I whispered. "Not with fists, with precision, with control, with patience." I pressed the bow to my heart. "Now I fight for me." The night before the hearing, I lay awake, listening to the house breathe. Shadows stretched across the ceiling. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent to keep peace. When Daniel dismissed my sacrifices, when Sophia mocked my work, when neighbors whispered, silence had cost me pieces of myself. Not this time. Morning came gray and cool. I dressed carefully, dark jacket, hair pinned back, no frills. I packed the folders, the statements, the exhibits. Before I left, I slid the bow into its case, not to play, but to carry as a talisman. At the door, Anya clasped my shoulders. "The music you've made has moved hundreds. Today, let your words move one judge." I smiled, the weight in my chest lighter. As I stepped outside, the world smelled of rain, fresh and clean. I drew a long breath. Closing line. This time, I was playing the final piece, not for them, but for myself. The courtroom is colder than I expect, light falling in harsh rectangles across polished wood. The judge's bench rises like a dark wave. The flags hang motionless, their colors muted under fluorescent glare. To my left, the gallery murmurs, a rustle of coats, a throat being cleared, the faint click of someone's pen. The clock above the door ticks in steady, indifferent beats. When the bailiff calls our case, even the air seems to hold its breath. I sit at counsel table beside Leela. My palms are dry. I'm surprised by that. Across the aisle, Sophia smooths the skirt of her suit and looks toward the judge with a face perfected for sympathy. Daniel stands next to her, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the floor. Between them, their lawyer arranges his notes with the reverence of a priest at an altar. The briefcase snaps shut with a metallic bite. We stand as the judge enters. Black robe, silver hair, expression calm and unreadable. The gavel taps once. The sound cleaves the whispers cleanly in two. Plaintiffs go first. Their lawyer, Mr. Gray, speaks in measured baritone, each sentence laid like a brick. Your Honor, he begins, palms open, this case is tragic, simple, and necessary. Mrs. Margaret Carter is a gifted but aging artisan whose judgment has deteriorated. Over the last decade, she has made impulsive transfers, issued contradictory assurances, and, most alarmingly, retracted a promise to assist her son and daughter-in-law with a home purchase. We do not seek to punish, we seek to protect. A limited transfer of financial authority would prevent further harm. Protect. The word lands between us like a cold coin. He gestures to Sophia, who lowers her eyes just so, and to Daniel, who does not look up. Then he lifts a page from his stack like a magician preparing a reveal. Exhibit P7, he says. An authorization bearing Mrs. Boring, Mrs. Carter's signature, consenting to transfer $300,000 toward the down payment. Leila doesn't twitch. She simply writes a note. Mr. Gray continues. You will also hear from a neighbor who recalls Mrs. Senders. Carter promising the full amount before Christmas, statements from friends concerned about her memory, and texts indicating her intent to help with the house before she wavered. This is not greed, it is intervention born of love. The words hang there, sterile and polished. When he sits, the gallery exhales. Leila rises, small and sharp beside the opposing oak. Your Honor, she says, this case is not about protection. It is about control. We will show a steady pattern of generosity from my client. Tuition paid, medical bills covered, necessities met, paired with a consistent refusal to fund a luxury she never promised. We will show that Exhibit P7 is a forgery, that a text the plaintiffs provided was cropped to omit the sentence, I cannot give you $300,000, and that the neighbor's memory places him in two cities at once. My client is precise, disciplined, and painfully clear-eyed. She does not require protection from herself. She sits. Her knee barely bumps mine. The touch steadies me. Mr. Gray calls a family practitioner first, a doctor I've seen twice in 10 years for flu and once for a tetanus shot. He speaks gently about aging and stress, about the way grief can blur attention. Under his words, I hear the hum of a narrative knitting itself. Older woman, fragile mind, kind intervention. He never says I'm incompetent. He doesn't have to. The scaffolding stands. Leila's cross is clean. Doctor, have you administered any cognitive assessment to Mrs. Botter? Carter? No. Have you observed her in her work? No. So your opinion is generalized, not specific. He concedes. The scaffolding drops a plank. Then Leila calls Anya Petrov, principal second of the Riverlight Symphony. Anya walks to the stand with her violinist posture. Back tall, chin level, calm like a held note. She swears in, hands folded neatly, eyes on the judge. Ms. Petrov, Leila says. How do you know Mrs. says? Carter? She recalibrated my 18th century instrument in a winter storm, Anya answers, accented consonants crisp. At midnight, the roof creaked. The glue had to set within a window of minutes. She measured to 1/10 of a millimeter in low light. Leila nods. What did you observe about her steadiness? Her hands did not shake, Anya says simply. Her attention did not wander. When the world was noisy, she made it quiet. My instrument sings because of it. Murmurs ripple through the benches. Anya's voice is not dramatic. It is definitive. Mr. Rixell, Gray attempts to diminish her. You're a musician, not a physician. I am a professional whose career depends on noticing the smallest tremor, she replies. On stage, a mind that slips is louder than any wrong note. Mrs. Carter does not slip. She steps down. The gallery silence feels warmer. Mr. Gray enters Exhibit P7, the supposed authorization. The clerk passes it to the judge. A copy lands before us. My stomach tightens at the sight of my name wearing someone else's gait. Leila rises. Your Honor, we move to exclude P7 pending forensic review. Preliminary analysis indicates the line weight is unnaturally uniform and the entry pressure inconsistent with Mrs. Pressure, Carter's usual signature. We will also submit a series of known exemplars for comparison. The judge considers, eyes dropping to the page, then to the stack of checks Leela has already tabbed. Reserved, she says. Fitted provisionally. I will weigh it with everything else. And we proceed. Mr. Gray calls Mr. C to C. Collins from 3B, who swears he heard me promise the full 300 in my kitchen before Christmas. He twists his cap in his hands and squints as if aiming for truth. Leela's cross takes less than 2 minutes. Mr. Collins, on June 5 of last year, you were home at 10:15 a.m.? I suppose so. She slides a photo to the ledge. The Milano Cathedral clock frozen at E9:47 in a corner of sun. This picture was taken the same morning, she says. Do you see my client? He leans forward. Looks like her. Do you see the time? He hesitates. 9:47. And the city? He swallows. Milan. Silence gathers, a soft, satisfied animal. Leela calls the record's custodian from the phone company, and then me, to authenticate my device. On the screen, blown up on a monitor, the full text thread appears. My message? I can help by looking at loan options. I cannot give you $300,000. And, Daniel's reply, we'll find another way. The cropped version Mr. Gray submitted omitted the second sentence and Daniel's answer. In the courtroom's stale air, the absence speaks loud. Mr. Gray objects on foundation. Overruled. The truth sits there, plain and undecorated. Someone in the back sighs. I keep my eyes forward. I do not look at Daniel. When they call Daniel, the ceiling seems to lower. He swears in without glancing at me, jaw tightened, wedding ring flashing as he raises his hand. Mr. Gray keeps him on narrow rails. Mom said she'd help. Mom is inconsistent. Mom is stressed. Daniel answers like a student reciting. He never uses the word promise, but the suggestion glints between lines. Leela's cross is gentle. Daniel, your mother paid your university tuition? Yes. 4 years? Yes. She paid your grandfather's hospital bill? Yes. She has ever refused you food, shelter, medicine? No. Has she ever promised you $300,000? He hesitates, pupils darkening. She said she would help with a house. Help how? His eyes flick to Sophia. She said we'd figure it out. Those are your words, Layla says softly, not hers. Daniel's mouth presses flat. The judge watches without blinking. I grip the edge of the table until the wood groans. Inside my chest, something cracks and does not bleed. It calcifies instead. Leela calls Dr. Noor Rahman, my optometrist of 15 years, to testify not about medicine, but about pattern. She schedules a year ahead. Dr. Ambles, Rahan says, arrives 10 minutes early. Tracks lens orders with serial numbers. That's not confusion. She calls Mr. Leone, retired conductor, to speak of rhythm and reliability. He keeps it to one sentence. In 50 years, I have seen indecision. Mrs. Carter is not that music. She calls Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery. She writes checks with shaky loops on cold mornings. Mrs. Alvarez says, but only because of the cold. She counts exact change for me when my eyes are tired. Each voice adds a thin, strong thread. Together, they weave something that can carry weight. Finally, Layla calls me. The oath tastes like iron on my tongue. Mrs. Carter, Leela says, did you ever agree to transfer $300,000 to your son and daughter-in-law? No, I answer. My voice surprises me. It is not small. I told them I could not. Have you provided for your family in other ways? Yes, I say. And the ledger of years rises behind my eyes. $180,000 tuition, $619,874, 12 hospital bill, rent, food, coats, bus fare, private school clarinet reeds when the teacher insisted. I gave what I could. I did not give what would erase me. She nods and turns a page. Look at Exhibit P7. Is this your signature? I study the loops wearing my face. No, mime stumbles, I say. It has lived a life. This one is a costume. I lower the paper. The judge watches me as if reading a score only she can hear. Mr. Gray's cross is designed to fray patience. Mrs. Carter, you've described yourself as generous. Isn't it true that generous people sometimes make promises they later regret? Regret and refusal are not the same, I say. I did not promise. You can't take your money with you. I am not trying to, I say, and a tremor of something almost like humor runs through me. I am trying to keep myself with me. He presses about age, about loneliness. I refuse the trap. I do not let bitterness speak. When he sits, my lungs burn as if I've been underwater too long and finally found air. Leila glances at the judge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, my client would like to address the court briefly. The judge considers, then nods. Briefly, I rise. My knees ache, but my back is straight. I place both hands on the edge of the lectern, feel the wood's coolness, and look at the judge, not at my son. My hands are older than they were when I began this life, I say. I do not pretend otherwise. My eyes tire sooner. I take longer to climb stairs. But fatigue is not incompetence. Age is not incapacity. When my son was small, I held a bow over strings while the world shuddered around us. Storms, bills, the kind of silence you buy when you can't afford peace. I carved wood to a curve so exact that music could live inside it. I sent tuition, I paid hospital debt, I stood between my family and the blunt edge of want. Those were my choices. They were not investments. They were love. Now I am asked to sign away not just money, but the right to decide when to say yes and when to say no. I say no, not because I love less, but because I have learned that love without boundaries is not love, it is erasure. $300,000 are the wages of a lifetime I plucked into being. But I will not sign to convert motherhood into a bill of sale. I was not born to be a ledger. I was born to be a person. I stop. The room does not move. The clock continues its indifferent march. Somewhere a chair creaks, a throat swallows. I sit. Leila's hand finds mine under the table, squeezes once, then lets go. Mr. Gray rebuilds his narrative in closing. Safety, reasonableness, the supposed risk of my impulses. He sets the forged paper in the center like a candle and orbits it with careful words. He calls Sophia dutiful. He calls Daniel concerned. He calls me stubborn. Leila stands and speaks more quietly than he does. This case is a ship made of careful language, she says, but its planks don't hold. Where there should be promise, there is only presumption. Where there should be memory, there is convenience. Where there should be concern, there is control. My client is not asking the court to bless selfishness. She is asking it to recognize autonomy. She has been generous to the point of self-erosion. The law does not require her to dissolve. She sits. The judge's face offers nothing. We wait while the judge reads through a few final pages. The room hums with the small noises of endurance. My pulse climbs into my throat. When she begins, her voice is even. The court is not persuaded that Mrs. Actors Carter lacks capacity or that a transfer of authority is necessary for her protection. She lifts P7 delicately, as if it might stain. The court assigns minimal weight to Exhibit P7. Forensic irregularities and inconsistent testimony render it unreliable. The plaintiff's crop text is troubling. The defense's exhibits, witnesses, and timeline are credible. Accordingly, the petition is denied. Full control of assets remains with Mrs. Carter. Any further attempts to obtain authority through misrepresentation will be met with sanctions. She pauses. The gavel lifts. It falls. The sound is clean and resonant, like a decisive chord that finally resolves the dissonance. Air returns to the room in a rush. The gallery shifts, papers whisper, someone coughs in relief that isn't theirs. I don't cry. My body wants to, but the tears do not come. Instead, I feel a loosening along the spine, as if invisible hands unhooked the armor I've worn for months. Beside me, Layla lets out a breath I didn't know she was holding. You did it, she says, but I shake my head. We did, I answer. She nods once agreement without ornament. Anya's hand appears on my shoulder. Her smile is small and luminous. The right note, she murmurs. Across the aisle, Sophia gathers her bag with fast, jerky movements. Her mouth is a thin, white line. Mr. Gray is already talking to her, already translating loss into plans. Daniel remains still, staring at the empty space where the judge had been. For a heartbeat, his face is simply my son's. The boy who once whispered from a blanket nest, "I'll make you happy, Mom." Then something shudders behind his eyes and he turns away. I let him go. The letting aches, but it is honest pain. No more pretending our music is the same. We file into the corridor, where the light is kinder. Dust floats like confetti in the square beams from high windows. Leela squeezes my hand a final time and peels off to discuss formalities with the clerk. I stand near the staircase, palm resting on the bow I've carried like a talisman. The wood is warm from my grip. It has waited with me through storm and silence, through rumor and paper and doubt. The courthouse doors open to a street rinsed by rain. The air tastes clean, metallic, and sweet. I step outside and feel my shoulders sink by a fraction, the exact measure of a small but real freedom. Cars hiss along the curb. A child laughs somewhere I can't see. The world did not end, it widened. I close my eyes and hear it. The faintest echo of harmony where dissonance once gnawed. Not a triumphal march, not yet. Something quieter. An overture to a life that belongs to me again. The gavel fell like a decisive chord, closing the dark movement of our family's symphony. The house is too quiet when I return. After the day's clamor, the shuffling of papers, the click of heels on tile, the judge's voice measured like scales, the silence feels like a vacuum. I close the door and lean against it, listening. Nothing answers. No footsteps, no whispers, no rustle of argument. The living room holds its breath. The folders still sit on the dining table, neat stacks of evidence that carried me through battle. Their edges catch the lamplight, sharp but inert now, like weapons laid down after a war. I walk past them without touching. In the workshop, the bow waits where I left it, across the back of a chair. I pick it up, its weight familiar, the polished wood warming quickly in my palm. I lower myself into the chair, setting the violin across my lap. I do not play. I only rest the bow against the strings and feel the faint vibration under my skin, the possibility of sound not yet born. The verdict replays in fragments. Petition denied. Full control of assets remains. Sanctions for misrepresentation. The words struck like chords, crisp and final. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there lingers something raw. I won. Yes. I kept what was mine, but the cost echoes louder than the victory. Daniel's face floats before me, his eyes refusing mine, his silence heavier than any accusation. He left the courtroom not with anger, not even with shame, but with absence. A door closing quietly. My heart twists. The truth is, I hadn't wanted just to win. I had wanted him to understand. To remember the nights I stitched his future with my tired hands, the mornings I went without so he could have more. The judge heard me, the witnesses heard me, but the one audience that mattered most turned away. I rise and make tea. The kettle hums, the steam curls. I pour into a chipped mug, the handle worn smooth by years. I sip slowly, letting the heat spread through my chest. The bitterness grounds me. At the window, I unlatch the frame and push it open. The night air drifts in, cool, scented faintly of wet leaves. Somewhere down the block, a dog barks once, then silence folds over again. I close my eyes and breathe until my shoulders loosen. Winning is not the same as healing. Freedom is not the same as joy. These truths arrive like unwelcome but necessary guests. I think back to all the nights I stayed silent for peace, signing checks without question, swallowing words to keep harmony. Tonight, silence feels different. It is not surrender, it is space. I finish the tea, rinse the cup, set it gently in the rack, then I return to the workshop. This time, I tuck the violin under my chin. I draw the bow across the strings, soft at first, barely more than a whisper. The note quivers, fragile, then steadies. It fills the room, small, imperfect, alive. The sound does not erase the ache in my chest. It does not bring Daniel back, but it reminds me I am still here. I can still create. The clock ticks past midnight. The bow grows lighter in my hand as fatigue seeps into my limbs. I set the violin down carefully, as if it too carries exhaustion. I whisper into the empty room, almost like a confession. I won, but the only audience I longed for, my son, has turned his back. The cafe windows open onto a square in Vienna, where the air smells of roasted chestnuts and autumn leaves. I sit at a small table by the glass, my palms cupped around a porcelain cup of coffee. The steam rises, curling in soft ribbons, light enough to vanish before I can catch it. I lift the cup. My hand does not tremble. The weight is nothing. Certainly nothing compared to the heaviness of papers, locks, and accusations I once carried. I take a slow sip. The taste is rich, dark, alive. Outside, a young man plays violin near the fountain, his case open for coins. The melody drifts through the square, bright, imperfect, but free. Children skip in time with it. Passers-by pause, smile, drop coins that clink like tiny bells. I smile too. Once, music had been a burden, the currency of my sacrifices. Now, it is simply music again. Selling the house had been easier than expected. Not because I did not ache, but because I no longer needed walls saturated with memory. I packed what mattered into a few trunks, my tools, my notebooks, a handful of letters. The rest, I let go. Letting go, I discovered, is lighter than holding on. Vienna welcomed me with cobbled streets and old echoes of orchestras. I rented a narrow studio above a bakery. The walls smelled faintly of flour and yeast. In the mornings, I opened the shutters to sunlight spilling across the Danube, and I felt something I had not in years. Possibility. I began to teach. Not grand classes, just a few students. Curious hands, eager to learn the patience of wood, the rhythm of shaping curves, the secret of listening to grain. Watching their eyes widen as a hollow shell of maple began to hum reminded me of my own hunger at their age. But this time, I did not starve for anyone else's dream. One afternoon, I placed my old bow inside a glass cabinet in the corner of the studio. For decades, it had been weapon, shield, burden. Now, behind glass, it became simply a relic of my journey, a memory, not a chain. Students sometimes ask, "Whose bow is that?" I tell them, "It belonged to the woman I used to be." Then I hand them a new one, lighter, smoother, and say, "Yours will write its own story." At night, I still think of Daniel. Of course I do. Sometimes I imagine him walking through these streets, hearing a violinist in a square, and remembering me. Sometimes the ache swells so sharp, I set down my tools and press my fist to my eyes. But the ache no longer defines me. It is a part of me, not the whole. I do not wait for his apology. I do not rehearse conversations that will never happen. My life is not a courtroom anymore. It is a workshop, a cafe, a quiet apartment where the floorboards creak in friendly rhythm. I think of beginnings and endings. Once I held a teacup so heavy it felt like it might shatter me. Now I hold a coffee cup that feels lighter than air. Once I heard silence as suffocation. Now I hear it as space where new music can grow. I think of motifs, the bow once clenched to my chest in despair, now resting peacefully in glass, the violin that once cried for me, now singing for students who laugh when they miss a note. I do not need to preach what I have learned. It rests in the quiet rituals, unlocking my studio door each morning, sweeping curls of maple from the floor, sitting by the window with coffee while the square fills with music I didn't have to pay for with my soul. One evening, as the sun lowers over the city, I write a single sentence in my notebook, ink steady and sure. I have left the old music behind, and now I write the melody of freedom for myself. I close the book. Outside, the street lamps bloom with light, and the sky opens wide, wide enough to hold every note yet to come. Thank you. If you've stayed with me through every measure of this story, then you have heard not only the words but the silences in between, the rests, the pauses, the places where I nearly broke. You've carried my weight for a little while, and that means more than applause ever could. I began this journey with hands that trembled over contracts and keys, with a heart that feared its own voice. I end it here in Vienna, with coffee lighter than air and music that belongs to me again. The courtroom has faded, the papers are archived, but the echo of those days still lives in me. Maybe you felt it too. That moment when your life becomes the background track for someone else's song. You nod, you give, you erase yourself note by note until you wonder if you're still there. So I ask you now, as one who has stood at both ends of that silence, if one day you discover you've been nothing more than the background to another person's melody, will you keep playing or will you begin to write your own? It is not an easy choice. I will not pretend otherwise, but it is the choice that gave me back my breath. If my story has touched you, share it. Let it find someone who still sits in the quiet, unsure whether their voice matters. Leave a comment. Tell me what part of your life feels like music written for someone else. Tell me if you've ever taken the pen back into your own hands. And if you'd like to walk with me further, to hear more stories where silence breaks and freedom hums, follow, subscribe, stay. Each week, I promise you another piece of truth, another step toward the kind of life that plays in your own key. Because we are not born to be background noise. We are born to sing.